What's up, everybody? Mr. Forrest back with part 2 of Arctic Chill. Let's not wait. Let's jump right into it. Mike, Ed, Sheila, and Steve arrived in Churchill, Manitoba. Churchill was tiny, but it was more beautiful than they could have ever imagined. There was so much to see. There was so much to look at. There was the northern hawk owl, the Smith's longspur, the three-toed woodpecker, the spruce goose, and the northern harrier. But they couldn't wait for the adventures. They were going to go on a tour of the Churchill River and see the beluga whales. They were going to go on a snowmobiling expedition, but that day they were going to go on a polar bear sightseeing tour. The kids were so excited. They were chatty. They were hyper. Sheila kept running around and cowtailing everyone, even perfect strangers. But before they could do anything else, they had to get checked into the cabin they were staying in and unpack their stuff and get ready to go. They looked around the cabin and it was enormous. There was enough room for everyone. There was a room for Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. There was a room for all 3 boys. Sheila got her own room all to herself. They had a jacuzzi on the back porch. They had a rec room with a pool table, with an old school arcade machine, and with a big cabinet filled with board games and card games. They were so excited. They got their stuff put away, and they all gathered together for an early lunch. It felt good to eat something that wasn't microwave food, and they figured their nostrils would fare a lot longer without Mike eating Hot Pockets. Mrs. Johnson made BLTs. They sat around the coffee table, they prayed together, and they began eating. And Mr. Johnson opened his Bible and read out loud while everyone was eating their lunch. And he was in Ephesians chapter 2. One more time he read verse 1, and you were dead in the trespasses and sins. When he read those words, it brought Mike's mind back to when he almost fell off the train, to when he almost died. And those words that Ed had spoken shook him. Mike, you're already dead. Because of his sins, Mike was spiritually dead. But it got worse from there. Mr. Johnson read all the way to verses 12 and 13. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Mike didn't like the thought of being separated from God, but he was starting to understand this concept. Mike always thought of himself as a pretty good person, but recently he'd really been thinking it through. And really, Mike was a sinner. Remember, sin is anything we do, say, or think that breaks God's law. And very, very often, Mike was doing, saying, and thinking things that broke God's law. Now, he liked to try to make excuses for it. He liked to try to pretend like it was no big deal, but he was starting to turn around and be honest with himself. Mike was a sinner, and because of his sin, he was separated from God. You see, every sin is serious, and here's why. Because God is perfect and holy. God can't excuse sin or overlook sin or pretend like it didn't happen. It's a serious offense to God, and he can't have sin in his presence, and that's why, because of our sin, we're separated from God. They finished up lunch and they prayed together one more time, and then they got bundled up and they prepared for their polar bear expedition. They were so excited. Everyone got to the site and everybody loaded into a massive tundra. A tundra is a huge vehicle that glides effortlessly over snow and ice and protects the passengers from polar bears. And it was perfect because nobody was there except for Mess and the Johnsons and the tour guide. The tundra roared to life and began driving over the snow, and the tour guide began babbling on.
Frequently called lords of the Arctic, these massive, beautiful creatures are enormous. A full-grown male polar bear can grow to as large as 10 feet tall and weigh as much as 1,300 pounds.
Steve said, "Oh, you mean that, like that one over there?" Everybody turned around and looked, and way off in the distance was a massive polar bear, bigger than any polar bear they had ever seen, even on TV. The tour guide said,
"You're very smart. Now be quiet."
Just then, 3 female polar bears surrounded the tundra. They were so cute, it looked like they were saying hi. And then suddenly, Mike got weird. Mike leaned over and said, "Who's a cutie snooty wooty? You are, and you are, and you are." He named one of them Gertrude, one of them Flora, and one of them Chrysanthemum. Sheila looked at Mike. "I thought Ed was the weird one." Mike said, "Don't listen to her, girls. She's just jealous that you're prettier than her. Pretty witty, cutie, snooty wooty."
With a highly acute sense of smell, these polar bears can pick up a scent up to 10 miles away. They can detect a seal under 3 feet of ice and snow and, "Hey kid, don't do that."
Everybody turned to look, and Ed was leaning over the edge, and he was feeding the female polar bears one of Mike's Hot Pockets. Ed's thought was if he could feed the polar bears Mike's Hot Pockets, Mike wouldn't have any Hot Pockets to eat that night and stink up the room. Plus, Mike had the bunk right above Ed's. But his plan backfired. Mike looked over and said, "Yeah, kid, don't do that." And he ran over and snatched the Hot Pocket and started eating it right in front of Ed. And he said, "I'm going to eat 2 more before bed tonight. And I'm sleeping in the bunk above you." They continued the expedition for another 30 minutes, and they didn't see any more polar bears, so like the excitement kind of died down, but little did they know, the adult male polar bear had picked up the scent and was following them from a distance. The tour guide continued.
Polar bears have no natural predators, therefore they have no fear.
No fear, Sheila thought. I wonder what that's like. Sometimes I'm afraid that people won't like me. No fear, Mike thought. I wonder what that's like. Sometimes I'm afraid that an older kid's gonna beat me up. No fear, Steve thought. I wonder what that's like. Sometimes I'm afraid I'm gonna miss an important shot in basketball. No fear, Ed thought. I wonder what that's like. Sometimes I'm afraid that an Irish tap dancing giraffe is going to poke its head out from under my bed in the middle of the night while I'm sleeping and chew on my toenails under a giant disco ball. Just then the tundra made a sputtering, spittering noise, and then it stopped. Steve looked around. Why did we stop? I don't see any polar bears around. Come to think of it, I don't hear the engine of the tundra. Excuse me, sir, why did we stop? The tour guide said,
"Everyone remain calm and stay seated. I'm going to go take a look. Meanwhile, you can talk amongst yourselves."
And he hopped out of the tundra and skidded around to the front, and he popped the hood, and he was tinkering around. Meanwhile, everybody else was trading pictures of the 3 female polar bears that they got, the pictures they got of Aurora Borealis. Meanwhile, nobody noticed as Mike sneaked out of the tundra and started playing in the snow. In fact, Mike started building a snowman, but not just any snowman. Mike got it on his mind to build a life-sized snowman of Anthony Davis. And he started by sculpting his signature shoes, by sculpting his socks, up his legs to his knobby knees. Now, Mike had actually had plenty of practice, and it all started when he was younger, and his mom would make him eat rice pudding. Mike hated rice pudding, but she made it like extra thick, and she always made him eat it, and he thought if he could make like a beautiful sculpture out of it, that she would feel bad wrecking his sculpture, therefore not making him eat it. It never worked, but it was worth a try, and Mike got really good at making rice pudding sculptures. He continued his sculpture and he sculpted Anthony Davis's shorts. Meanwhile, everybody back on the tundra had no idea. They were showing pictures, they were talking, they were laughing. Meanwhile, the adult male polar bear was getting closer and closer. Mike kept sculpting, everyone kept talking, the polar bear kept lumbering, closer and closer. Closer and closer. Mike finished Anthony Davis's jersey that said Lakers and his number 3. He sculpted his arms, even his fingers. He sculpted up his neck, to his face, to his hair. He even sculpted his unibrow. And when he was done, Mike said, "Voila, my masterpiece." Everybody heard Mike outside the tundra and they turned to look. It was incredible. At first they were going to scold Mike, like, Mike, get back in here. But it was so amazing. They had to get out their phones and they started taking pictures and they started clapping for Mike. And Mike started taking bows and Mike started waving. And all of a sudden the picture taking stopped and the clapping stopped and Steve's eyes were wide. Mike kind of noticed, but he kept bowing, wondering why everyone was silent. And then he realized something must be wrong. He was afraid to look behind him. Standing behind him, the adult male polar bear had reared up on his hind legs. It was huge, so much bigger than Mike, who was pretty big himself. So much bigger than the 7-foot-tall Anthony Davis sculptured snowman. It was a 10-foot-tall adult male polar bear. Mike turned around and saw him and fell down. He scrambled to his feet. He turned and he ran about 15 steps and he found a tree and he climbed the tree as fast as he could. That polar bear was right on his tail. The polar bear stood on its hind legs, dug its claws into the tree, started shaking, let out a roar. Guys, sin is serious. Because every time we sin, we're sinning against God, who is holy. Because of our sin, without Jesus, we are separated from God. But what's going to happen to Mike? Is the polar bear going to get him? Is he going to escape? How would he escape? He's stuck up in a tree. You got to wait till next time to find out. Our memory verse this time is Ephesians 2:12. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Guys, today we talked about the bad news. The bad news is that because we are sinners, we are separated from God. But don't worry. Next time, we're going to talk about the good news. You don't want to miss it. Guys, make sure you're a subscriber. Make sure you leave a thumbs up. And we'll see you guys next time. Until then, Mr. Forrest out.